All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have a new series that we're starting uh, titled Success Leaves Clues. Tony Robbins. You'll hear this quite often. We want to incorporate a lot of the things that we've been talking to you about and attributes, characteristics that make for successful professional careers, successful personal lives, and just give you examples of who we've seen kind of bigger than life characters throughout history that have shown direct evidence of these. Just kind of give you some example, and if nothing else, some introduction into knowing more about these folks. A couple of interesting quotes, and I found in doing my research just a ton of quotes. It seemed to be another one of his hobbies from Teddy Roosevelt was um, uh, generating quotes. It's hard to fail, but it's worse to never have tried to succeed. I think is extremely powerful. And then with self discipline, most anything is possible. So, some of the attributes we're going to talk about, when I say we, it's Dr. Hall and myself. We're going to talk about perseverance. Don't know too many people that have more perseverance than Teddy Roosevelt. Adversity, the fact that trial in your life creates character. And then we'll get on to the master skill, the delay of gratification. So with that, we'll bring on Dr. Hall. He is a business psychologist. He's an executive coach, public speaker, multi-time author. And then the execution side of things is the neuro nerd side, which helps us to understand how biologically we can implement these things into our lives and on a kind of a personal basis. So with that, I'll bring Dr. Hall on. How you doing?
I am well. I'm well. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on specifically about this one because quite often and I'm excited that Theodore Roosevelt Jr. is our first in this series because he's just kind of that guy, the guy's guy, the man's man, the Billy Badass, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
So interesting on top of the attributes we're talking about. And you know a lot
I,
about him, so we're excited.
well, I know a little bit about him. There's certainly better experts on Roosevelt or Teddy Roosevelt than me, but I've read a few books on him.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's get into it. I'll do a couple housekeeping items here. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jared Lee. I'm the associate broker and team lead here at My Home Connection, also known as MHC Realty. And our sponsor for today is the Perfect Real Estate Business. We've been developing this over the course of the last couple of decades, now in large part with Dr. Hall, introducing things that we just don't often see or ever see. And that's business coaching along with life coaching, mentoring, and training. And then some of the other things that you can and should have in your business, such as revenue sharing, profit sharing, lead generation. We'd love to chat with you a little bit about that. So if you have questions and we can be of help along those lines, feel free to reach out to us in the comment section below. With that, we'll bring Dr. Hall back on. And, I guess the most striking thing about, Theodore Roosevelt is that I think that I've heard, and I'd be curious if you agree, is the asthma that he had and how that shaped or formed his approach to life, um, and how presuppositions or worldviews get created. Do you think that had a really strong play in that?
I think it was an important formative experience for him. So for people who don't know very much about Roosevelt, I'll give a rough summary. And again, there are plenty of people who know way more about Roosevelt than me. But he suffered from asthma as a child, and treatments for asthma in those days were not nearly as robust as we have these days. And pretty much it was just suffering through the asthmatic attacks. And he decided, well, I'm going to build up my ability to deal with these asthmatic attacks by exercising more and increasing my own lung capacity. So he essentially um, built up his lung capacity through suffering by exercising more and not having a rescue inhaler and not having all the things that we have today for people with asthma. And in adulthood, he did not suffer from asthma anymore. He essentially suffered his way out of it.
So we've talked about kind of perseverance before, but here you have an individual that could rightfully say, "Hey, I have asthma," and back in those days, I wouldn't imagine that it would uh, not be reasonable to say that could be life threatening.
Absolutely, it's
And
life threatening. I mean, it's no small asthma is no small matter.
yeah, so he could have said, "Hey, I probably better take it easy. I shouldn't challenge myself in a physical capacity because I don't know what it'll do to me." But he clearly went the extreme opposite direction. I think he's the one who said, "I want to live a strenuous life because of this."
Yeah, and his one of his famous quotes was about the strenuous life, which is a way he decided to live his life from his childhood, to push himself to great limits. One of the fun stories about when he was president is that I believe he and his sons decided to play hooky one day, and they went down to the river. I believe it was the Potomac. Again, I'm not great with my Washington geography, and they stripped down naked and swam across. So here we have the president of the United States leaving the White House, going down to a river, stripping naked and swimming.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't happen today. And it was cold. It was not in the summertime. It was not cool. This was, I think, in the spring or the fall. So it was an invigorating swim.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of stuff he did in adulthood, and it's all a manifestation of the life he lived. Again, he came from a wealthy background. He didn't have to do anything. He could have stayed cloistered in a parlor and done nothing but read books, which he liked to do. But he decided that that's not the life for me, so he moved out west, became a cowboy, a wrestler, a boxer, and just worked up his physical capacity, and then later moved back. Eventually became the head of the Rough Riders, and so he was a horseman. So he spent a great deal of time outdoors. And if you know anything about asthma and horses, those don't always really mix real well, because horses have a lot of horse hair, and a lot of people are allergic to them, so it aggravates their asthma, and he went with it. So he kept doing more and more things that made his life more and more difficult, and eventually led a volunteer cavalry company, the Rough Riders, that went out and helped win the Spanish-American War. It was essentially a group of ragtag people from varying places in life. This was not an enlisted group. It was a volunteer group of people who all kind of got behind Roosevelt and thought this is going to be a great idea. So you had, well-educated people, what we now call blue-collar people, all mixed together. They love to ride, and they love to fight.
Well, you made a good point. I mean, he had yet another reason why he could have just kind of lived in the lap of luxury, right? His family was affluent, well-to-do, and money wasn't going to be of concern for him. I guess what I'm leading up to on the perseverance side, when you make that decision that you want to live a life like that, I don't know that most would. I think human nature is to be comfortable, take it easy. If all things being equal, most people would have gravitated in that direction.
It's not just human nature; it's the nature of all mammals is to conserve energy. And it may be of all living things is how do we conserve our energy so that we can have more resources for later. And the choices he made were not energy conserving. And so he really put himself at risk. And if anyone has asthma, I don't have asthma, but if anyone has asthma, then you know how hard it is to catch your breath if you've been exercising. There is no rescue inhaler. And you could pass out. Mm-hmm. And he was willing to push himself to those levels. And if you've ever been without breath, if you've been ever unable to breathe, it's a terrifying experience. It activates a whole different kind of fear that, fear of snakes or fear of mountain lions evokes. Lack of getting oxygen hits you at a different place in your brain, and it really is hard to overcome. So to do that, requires an incredible amount of mental self-discipline, and then frankly just being tough,
Yeah.
because you have to go through it over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. This isn't a one-time event where you struggle out. Okay, I lived this time, but hey, I'm going to do it again because that's my MO. That's how I conduct my life. I'm going to experience this over and over again, and or get
And
over it.
eventually I'm going to get over it. And if you've ever been without breath, it will evoke a kind of fear or anxiety, or it's a threat response in your body, and um, it makes everything else not matter. Nothing else matters except breathing.
Right.
And if he's willing to face that over and over again, that takes a special kind of person. And you got to practice that. That just doesn't come easy.
Well, that's a good point. Because I was thinking, you know, uh, do you either have this or you don't have it? Clearly, that's a mindset most don't and won't have. Um, but clearly, his approach to life said, "I'm going to do it no matter what it takes." And then is it the muscle thing where you grow larger muscles because you work your muscles? You don't just go to the gym and then the next day have big muscles. You're doing it all the
You,
time.
you have to do it all the time. I guess the thing I want to reiterate is to get past the 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 body's threat response to suffocation is far more difficult than getting past the body's threat response to a snake. Um, and it is so overwhelming as to make nothing else matter.
Mm.
And if you're willing to embrace that over and over and over again until you you know it's going to suck, and you're going to do it anyway. That's unusual. That's a
Yeah.
kind of perseverance that is unusual, and you don't get it unless you practice it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue into our next, topic here, and that's adversity. So, um, the perspective on adversity, again, I think it's a natural thing. I don't want trials. I don't want tribulation. I don't want difficulty in my life. This guy clearly said, I have this physical condition. I know it's going to come up again. So I'm going to subject myself to adversity because I'm going to build a character of just absolute, hardened resolve in everything I do. Nothing that I want to do will be undone.
Yes, yes, and the lessons he learned from overcoming that particular adversity, he then could apply to lots of other challenges in his life, and he had remarkable success. We have to add to that he also had a remarkable intellect. I mean, he had incredible intellect and incredible charisma. He was like the total package.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, some of us have a few skills and gifts, and he had the total package.
Well, he was a Harvard grad, as I recall.
Yeah, no slouch. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think he, if I understand correctly, in my brief bit of research, politics was an area that his father later on in life just didn't succeed in, but his father succeeded in everything. So he had a good example of, how to be successful watching his father, but apparently his dad failed in that. So, his take was, I'm going to figure out how to be, and maybe he just was naturally, I don't know, and then evolved it, but charismatic, right? Politicians clearly need to have charisma.
Right.
And I'm just going to get up in front of people until I figure out how to be charismatic.
Well, and he was a captivating speaker. If we think about the one talent he didn't have is he didn't have a Morgan Freeman voice. The kind of voice that everybody wishes they had. He had a high, squeaky voice, and yet he was able to project it in and be so cogent in his arguments and so persuasive in the way he spoke that it overcame that particular liability.
Yeah. Current times, my mind goes to RFK Jr. because clearly he's got issues with his voice, and he has to be very articulate, very persuasive. That kind of approach, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have the same condition that affects RFK and some of the other Kennedys, but he just had. If you listen to recordings of him, he does not have a pleasant voice.
Yeah, yeah. Again, persevere, figure it out, right? Take my strengths
and overcome.
Yeah,
Which he did. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the character side of the adversity is, we've talked about this. And by the way, for our listeners, everything we're talking about, we've had specific detailed episodes on these topics. And now what we're doing is showing you evidence of people that have implemented these in their lives. So if you want to know more, perseverance, what does that mean? Adversity, what does that mean? But the character side of adversity, to have the perspective of even going so far as to say, I am looking forward to my next bout of difficulty, because I'm going to come out of this learning more and being stronger in who I am or what I'm about, or, whatever that looks like. I guess I'd want the audience to know that that is a perspective shift that will serve you well, that isn't often, if ever, embraced.
Well, it goes back to the basic human and animal and all living thing default is to conserve energy and to avoid adversity. And it does, adversity will come to you whether you like it or not. And whether you run from it or you embrace it says something about you. If you pursue adversity for your own enhancement, it will make you a significantly better person. The shorthand is bitter or better, and you can work to make yourself better through adversity, which is a very stoic approach to life. But we see it in all the people who climb mountains, who do hard things because they're hard.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a reason for doing it.
There's a reason for your own personal development, and the purpose for personal development is so that you can be a benefit to more people.
Yeah,
that's the purpose for personal development.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Is this a point, a proper point, a logical point of interjecting? And my mind went in a couple of different areas, but oh shoot, I might have to come back to this one.
Well, let me define adversity for people who haven't.
Anti-fragile. That's one I want to come back around to, but go ahead.
Oh, we'll absolutely talk about anti-fragile. But in my thinking, adversity is the crucible, suffering is the crucible in which your character is built. And we see people who have successfully suffered through difficulty, through adversity, they do become bitter or better. And one of my maxims is never trust a person who hasn't had adversity, because you don't know what they're made of. And so most people don't seek out adversity, but unless you live a completely coddled life, you will have adversity. And if you haven't had it, you're probably not much good to most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are my presuppositions.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt clearly has had adversity, and you know how he's going to handle it, right? The whole, speak softly, carry a big stick. That speaks volumes of how he's going to handle big situations.
And he did. He projected force by sending the Navy around all around the world to show off the American might when he was president. It's like, okay, you do this, we will come and we will take you out and clean it up.
Yeah.
So that was a projection of force. But you wanted to talk about anti-fragile.
Yeah.
Anti-fragile is a term coined by a mathematician and financier and philosopher, a guy named Nassim Taleb. And he has a book called Anti-Fragile. And in it, he talks about this concept that systems improve from chaos, and that human beings are an anti-fragile system that we improve from chaos or difficulty, and that we want in finance, you want to look for investments that improve, become stronger. They are anti-fragile in chaotic times, which is different than resilient, which means these are systems that in chaos compress, but then reconstitute themselves into their original form after the chaos is over. What Taleb talks about is that these are systems that actually improve from it. And so human beings are anti-fragile systems. They improve from chaos.
And I think I've heard you use the kind of analogy of an egg being fragile, a tennis ball being resilient,
Yeah,
because an
but
egg.
clay, yeah, an egg will crack if you drop it. A tennis ball will rebound and return to its original form. But clay requires slamming on a table in order for it to drive out the air so that when you heat it in the kiln, it won't explode. So it requires adversity, it requires chaos in order for it to become stronger. And if you talk to people in construction, the same is true with concrete. That if you pour concrete, then you have to shake it to settle it and get out the air bubbles, make sure it's mixed right, and then some types of concrete they'll actually compress, and that makes it even harder. And so these are all things that make it an anti-fragile material.
Yeah.
And human beings are like that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And in our case study here, I guess I don't know, I just threw that term out there. Hopefully, it's accurate. But there's clearly adversity in Theodore Roosevelt, obviously affectionately known as Teddy Roosevelt, as or TR. I've heard stories of him. I don't know if it's accurate, but I think he lost both his wife and his mom on the same day.
Yeah, and his diary in the diary, he writes an X. There's an X in it, and it says, "The light has gone out of my world," because his wife and his mother died on the same day, and his mother was tremendously important to his life, and he was very much in love with his wife. And so when he became president, his daughter acted as the first lady, and she was apparently a lot like her dad. She was pretty hard to
Bigger than
handle.
life.
He was a little bit wild as a young person, and can you imagine being in the White House as a young adult and essentially having budget to throw parties, and she threw some crazy parties.
Yeah, that's funny.
But yes, so he lost both his wife and his mother on the same day, and it was a transformative event for him.
Yeah, yeah. He went on a safari for big game. I mean, there's some adversity there, right? Especially in those days.
Yeah. After he was president, was it after he was president?
I think so, because he was the first. I think it was the first, and to this day is the youngest president, right? 42.
Yeah, he was the youngest president. He was vice president, and the president for whom he was vice president died in office from an illness, and so he was thrust into the presidency. He never expected that he would take that position. So yeah, he was the youngest president. He served out the remainder of that term and then ran again. Because of the time, he actually left office and then ran again later. And he would have, had he won that second full term, he would have been in office longer than anyone prior to his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times. Anyway, back to the safari. When he left the presidency, he went on safari, hunted big game, did a lot of travel, went to the Panama Canal, he lived the strenuous life. It was during that time, though, he also ate strenuously, so he gained a lot of weight during those 4 years. He'd always been a fairly stocky man, but he became a lot stockier in those post-presidential years.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just a couple of examples. The other one that I think I'm aware of is he's a boxer, so he loses vision in one eye, so he transitions to jujitsu. It's like, well, I kind of shouldn't be boxing anymore, but let me go do something. He didn't just say I'm going to give up.
Yeah, and he continued on.
Yeah,
I mean, he was really a man with tremendous energy because he trained himself to have tremendous energy.
yeah, yeah. Just
He
worked at it.
was multilingual. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, he could write with both hands. Um, he he was incredibly well read, incredibly smart. He was an unusual character in that he had so many gifts.
Didn't he have like a
And
handful of languages?
yeah, I think it was seven, including I think Greek and Latin, two of the dead languages.
Wow.
But yeah, there didn't seem to be much he couldn't do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a lot of perseverance, obviously, a lot of adversity. The self-discipline side of things, I referenced one of his quotes earlier, but what I want to go back to, and you talk real early on in your book, is the master skills, that delay of gratification, and clearly by virtue of that quote, this was a attribute of Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, yeah, anyone who's successful has learned how to delay gratification, and the delay of gratification is putting off a short term small goal for a larger, longer term, bigger goal later. And you can't be successful in life until you master this particular skill. It is the master skill. No one becomes successful in anything unless they've learned how to apply this in some area of their life.
Yeah, kind of the newer versions, it seems like today is, knowing that something sucks, but doing it anyway,
Yeah, embrace the suck.
right.
You know, it's going to be painful, but learning not to mind the pain.
Yeah.
That's how people get successful. Is waiting for something good, which is to some degree or another an emotionally or psychologically painful condition.
Yeah. Now, if you're delaying, so you get this instant, which is pervasive throughout our culture, this instant gratification, right? It's probably going to be the downfall. I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but the downfall of our culture is this instant gratification because everything's right there, especially in America.
All around the world, but yeah, particularly in the Western and developed world, yeah, we don't have to wait for anything.
So, what is that doing to us individually, and then as a larger group, where we can't say, I'm going to forego this instant gratification. Let's say, hey, I should be going to the gym, but now I want to open my social media platform of choice. Whatever. Insert
Yeah, I
alternative
mean,
here.
it's always easier to sit on the couch with a bag of potato chips on your stomach and watch a show, or doom scroll on your device. It's always easier because we are looking for low energy expenditure. But the delay of gratification requires concentration and willpower. And willpower is an effortful act. And so when people say, oh, you're going to just talk about willpower, what if I don't have willpower? Well, the research suggests that you don't have willpower because you haven't practiced.
Right.
You can't do 10 push-ups because you haven't practiced. It's not that it's magic. It's that people who get willpower have figured out they got to practice it. And it's not easy. It is painful. Physically, psychically, it's just painful.
Yeah.
And you have to embrace the suck.
Yeah. Yeah. David Goggins didn't become the David Goggins that we know today overnight. He was a very heavy man. I mean, I think he was 300 plus pounds.
Yeah, David Goggins is an exceptional person, and when I say that, I mean that as a compliment, but also as an observation of reality. Is that most people do not have the capacity that he has trained himself to endure the kind of pain that he endures and willingly embraces. He is a very exceptional human being. So when people look at David Goggins and think, "Oh, I couldn't ever do that," yeah, you're probably right. But you can do more than you are now, and he can be an inspiration.
Yeah.
But at some point, running 72 hours straight like Goggins does is pretty darn unusual stuff. It is exceptional, but you can probably run longer than you think you can.
Yeah. Just got to put in the work, do the work, embrace the suck.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't get to 72 hours overnight. He got there over years and years of building up his reserve and learning how much more he can take.
Yeah. So the one thing we talked about briefly before we started this episode was, hey, if we talk about a lot of positive things, that's all well and good and what people can incorporate into their lives. But also, these people that do kind of reach the pinnacle of success or what have you, they're human. They're not perfect either. And what could they have done or changed in their life to not have the distractions or what have you? We did hit the 30-minute mark. So we can't spend a ton of time on it, but like, what would be one of your thoughts that you would say, man, what could this guy with all these attributes accomplished, but for this one or two things?
Yeah, I think, Roosevelt, because he was so exceptional, he put so much confidence in his exceptionalism to believe that his intellect and his gifts and his talents and his charisma made him right all the time and made him the best choice all the time. So there was in him, he's sort of the proto late 20th century politician, even though he was in the first quarter of the 20th century, that larger than life figure that believes his own press clippings. That kind of ultimately was his downfall and the downfall of the Republican Party because of him. He was a member of the Republican Party. After his term and a half, he kind of knighted his vice president, William Howard Taft, as the next guy. Taft won. Teddy Roosevelt goes out on his world tour, comes back, and is so disappointed in the way Taft has run things that he decides, well, I'm going to run against him with a new party, which he called the Bull Moose Party. And he was so captivated with his own charisma that what he did was he split the Republican Party, which made it possible for Woodrow Wilson, who was a thoroughly uncharismatic figure, to win the presidency.
Just by splitting the votes.
By splitting the votes. And so I can talk negatively about Wilson for a long time, but Roosevelt's part in this is that his ego got the best of him. And he is, in my mind, the best example of the difference between a powerful, charismatic figure and a leader. Leaders are very often powerful, charismatic figures, but they use that power, they use that charisma for a greater purpose or for the benefit of those who follow them. And Roosevelt's downfall, I think, was that he used his power and his charisma for his own self-aggrandizement. And that cost the Republican Party. I mean, they were essentially functionally out of power for half a century because of that misstep.
Because he thought he knew better.
Because he thought he knew better and he thought he could win. And it was during this campaign that he got shot on stage. He's got a bullet lodged in his chest, and he continues to speak for another half hour.
We did miss that adversity.
He's an exceptional human. We get it. And he did not leave a legacy in the Republican Party of leadership. And his sons, it's hard to say. One son was killed in World War I. The other son served without much fanfare, but competently in World War II. But he didn't leave a legacy of leaders in the Republican Party or in his family that created that same level of power and charisma. So I think it's worth noting that I think great leaders leave a legacy of other leaders.
Yeah.
And what Roosevelt did was he left a legacy of Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah. Yeah, we've
So
talked about that in I think the glory portion, right? The full expression of a thing or
yeah,
of a person, and clearly he had a lot of power, he reached his glory, but what does that mean? Decades later, you
right.
know, probably want to analyze what your glory, what you want it to look like.
You may become the full expression of yourself, but does that full expression leave a legacy? And I think there was more he could do. Whether if his one son would have survived the war, would he have become a presidential candidate? Perhaps we'll never know. But if but I wish for his sake and for our country's sake that Teddy would have spread more of a leadership legacy.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thanks for that. I guess case study, observation, kind of a review. Let's kind of wrap things up. Let's definitely make sure that folks know how to get a hold of you and your resources. Where's the best place to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find out about me at my website, drrogerhall.com, drrogerhall.com. You can follow me on social media, on X, on Instagram, on I think everything else, at drrogerhall.com. And that's spelled out, drrogerhall.com. You can find out about my books, Expedition, which is my leadership book, Staying Happy, and DIY Brain, which are available on Amazon and in audiobook. And I have another book coming out called DIY Leader Brain, which is how leaders interact and what's the neurobiology of how leaders interact with the people who follow them. I also have an online course called Freak Out about how to help you overcome fear. And I have a podcast called Second Thoughts with Dr. Roger Hall, which is available on most of the podcast platforms.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, all good stuff. I'm glad that we were able to connect up and just kind of talk through what attributes, what characteristics that Teddy Roosevelt exuded during his life. I think it's, certainly an interesting life. And if we can learn from him and how to incorporate these things into our lives, I think everybody benefit from that.
I hope to. He's certainly worth looking into. Edmund Morris has written 3 biographies on Roosevelt and was thoroughly captivated by the different phases of his life. I think it's 3, it may be 4 now that he's written. So there are plenty of resources that you can find out about Roosevelt and get a thorough understanding of the man.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, as always, Dr. Hall, we appreciate your time and insight, and we'll just wish everybody a blessed one. Take
Thank
care.
you.